The idea is that in dynamic markets, strategy is largely around key processes. So, I mean, a classic one is Cisco and acquisitions, Yahoo and alliances, Mittal, the big steel company, around acquisition. So key processes. McKinsey is arguing their strategies around who they hire. Within those processes are then some simple rules. Which opportunities you're going to pick, so which products you're going to develop, how are you going to do it, how fast are you going to do it when you leave. So those are some of the heuristics that people use to run processes. One of the interesting things we've been looking at is how do people learn rules? How do people learn a heuristic to develop a product development capability, develop an internationalization capability? To be more specific, we've been looking at internationalization. How do managers within companies learn to internationalize? So you go to France, you learn some things. What do you carry forward to Italy? What do you figure is French specific? What we started to realize is people learn some things sooner than others. Typically, people will learn which countries to go into, or which, more broadly, which opportunities to take, and some rudimentary stuff about how to execute those opportunities. For example, whether to use greenfields if it's internationalization. So they will learn that. They will at least they'll make some guesses about that. They will probably be wrong. They'll fix the errors, and they will start to elaborate those rules. So you're starting to elaborate these ideas about how to, and about what opportunities to pick. But then what happens is people start to learn timing, because timing really requires you to think about several opportunities at once. What we've seen, so temporal thinking kicks in a little later. And so people start to learn about how fast they can do things, the sequence in which they want to do things. So for example, they start to learn what kinds of countries they should go into first and then second and third. So they start to learn temporal rules. Then what happens, they're getting more and more elaborated rules, and then they start to realize that they actually want to simplify. So they start to realize that they have too many rules. They actually back off. So you'll see an elaboration of rules and routine, and then a recognition of no, back off, and starting to see, for example, things at a more general level. So let me give you an example. We were looking at a security company. There's a Singaporean security company. They started going international, and they thought first of all, they thought, well, our key customers are banks, because it's a 24/7 operation. They need banking. But they realized when they went to Malaysia that the Malaysians really didn't want Singaporeans running the security in their banks. They started to realize, wait a minute, what we're really doing is selling to companies where proprietary information is important, and being up all the time is important. So they started to say, well, that's insurance companies. But then they went to China, and it was a different market, and they started to realize that kind of company that they wanted to sell to was now manufacturing. And so what they started to do is realize they started to adjust the rule, and finally they had an aha moment where they raised the level of abstraction and said, wait a minute, it's really about people who care about proprietary information and who can pay us. That was the other key thing that came up. So they start to elaborate, then they simplify, and then they become more abstract. Mm-hmm. And that lets them then go to a lot more companies. So in Saudi Arabia, when they went there, it was a focus on oil companies and so forth.
Mm-hmm. And do companies need to, so in the context of startups or new initiatives within a large company, do they need to do this initial experimentation, get to the simplification before they can really scale the business, or can that take place during the period when they're really growing rapidly? Do you have to stabilize these before you scale, or can you do it while you're scaling?
It's actually it's hard to learn the rules while you're scaling, because you typically are learning so many different things at once that you can't actually figure out what you've learned versus what's idiosyncratic. Mm-hmm. So usually it takes 3 or 4 revs, whether it's new products, whether it's acquisitions. It takes you 3, 4, 5 trials, if you will, before you get to the point where you've simplified the rules, you're understanding the timing, and then that's when you can kind of crank it up. The other thing that we've seen that you can do if you understand the way in which you're learning is you can start as a manager to realize that, to look for the rules that you haven't already learned and say, well, you know, we don't have any timing rules. We should. We've got to add those. We need some priority rules. We don't have them. What should they be? So if you know what the structure of the rules should be, then you can start filling in the gaps that you may have missed.